Welcome to the Fusionary Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Shivani Gupta, and I have an incredible guest in store for you today, Dr. Yael Joffe. Hi, Dr. Yael. How are you?
Hi, Shivani. Thank you so much for having me here.
I am so grateful that I ran into you at the A4M conference at your booth because, as you know now, I am a voracious learner. I have this love of learning and understanding the body and health. And so when I met you, I was like, wow, I have met someone who can finally answer some of my questions. So if you all don't know, Dr. Yael Joffe founded 3x4 Genetics and now serves as its chief scientific officer. She brings over 20 years of experience in nutrition, genetics, sound research, clinical practice, and scientific integrity to 3x4. She's globally acknowledged as a leading expert in the field of nutrigenomics. And I have taken this test, the 3x4. I got my results. I went over it with my doctor, my functional medicine doctor at the time, and I thought, wow, this thing answers so many questions I've had around my health, detoxing pathways, why I take certain supplements and I never win at seeing them rise on my blood work. It was just so validating. And then it also talked about my workout abilities and how I can lift heavy. And I was like, yes. Thank you for acknowledging I am built for certain things that I believe and think, but sometimes I doubt because I get injured and things like that. And the report even said, you are likely to have soft tissue injuries. And I thought, okay, so this is answering so many questions that were true. And then it also enlightened me as to things I should focus on that I never would have imagined. Like mine says bone health, very high. Like I need to go get a bone density scan, stop avoiding it. It's like a very big focus that needs to be looked at just to make sure I'm okay. So will you kick us off by sharing what got you into this? And then we'll dive into what is nutrigenomics and how people can use a test like this to truly optimize their health in a way that maybe they didn't think of yet.
Okay, I mean, all those things. And I just want to state that not only can you lift big weights, but actually just had a look at your genetic test result before we came on, and you have the potential to be an amazing athlete. I don't know what you're doing, but your genes are like right up there with like really, really not just power training, but all training. So I hope you taking advantage of those fantastic genes. All right. So I wish I had them. How did I get into this? So I started out, my grandmother got cancer many decades ago. And no one could give me answers. So no one could tell me why she got the cancer. She had a GI cancer, what we could have done to help her, how we could have delayed it, prevented it, how we could have treated it better. It was just terrible. It was an awful, awful experience. And after she passed, I was actually studying architecture. I was like, this is not okay. We need to do better than this. So I dropped out of my architecture degree and went looking for an answer on the why. Like, why are we getting cancer? Why are we not preventing it? Anyway, the closest degree I could find to try and give me insight into health was to become a dietitian, which I did, but it didn't give me the answers I was looking for. So it was some time ago. And I think probably dietetics has evolved a lot since then, but it just didn't give me answers. And I was very disillusioned with what I was learning about. And so carried on looking. And one day I was living in London and was introduced to an extraordinary woman who was my first mentor. And she was a geneticist, a molecular biologist. And she had this dream that genetics and nutrition would be the future of medicine. And this is in the year 2000, so it was some time ago. Wow. And I remember thinking, like, are you crazy? Like, there is no relationship between genetics and nutrition. It's kind of funny considering my career. But there was something about it that was really engaged, like seductive, like something that just piqued my interest and my curiosity. Like you, we're very curious. We're always learning. And there was just something about what she was talking about. So she was starting the first company in the world to build a nutrition genetics test. And she was looking for a dietitian. She couldn't find one who knew anything about genetics because they did not exist. So I kind of put my hand up and said, take me. I promise I'll learn, and that's what I did. So I learned got myself a few textbooks, kind of was teaching myself genetics, and then eventually went back to university and got a PhD in genetics. So finally. And so I've been in this amazing world of nutrigenomics, nutrition genetics, for the last 24 years. And obviously, over that time, I have built many genetic tests, built many testing companies. I have built an education company to teach clinicians how to use genetics in practice. I've had a clinic. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey. And then, of course, 3x4, which has been my heart company, I call it. It's the company where everything that I dreamt about and doing in the space, I've finally got to do in 3x4.
That's awesome. I love that. Isn't that the greatest place to land? I feel like I've landed in the exact company I was meant to build in this lifetime. And the fact that I get to build it and enjoy the journey is just the most profound gift. You get to live your actual dharma out, which is it's the most joyful thing. Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
it. And I mean, it's a journey, right? It doesn't just happen. There's a lot of hours and work. You know, the 10,000 hours that Malcolm Gladwell talks about. I think I'm probably on 20,000 now, but it's an amazing journey. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, and I think of when people say, it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. I'm about to hit 10 years in my supplement company, and I'm like, yeah, it kind of took that long for me to
Oh, my favorite is when people say to me, "Oh, you're so lucky. You're so lucky that you landed up in nutrigenomics," and I'm like, lucky.
yeah,
That 25 years of hard work is lucky. Yeah. So I always say, I mean, it does. Luck is interesting, and I think luck definitely plays a role. But I think it's really hard work.
I do too. I think
Yeah.
it's persistence and having the courage and the determination and a lot of the traits we have to have. So when it comes to DNA tests, I always was very hesitant to take one because I was like, someone's going to have my data. Is this going to be safe? I was always worried about 23andMe and like data breaches, which did happen in the end. And it's why in my house, I don't have like an Echo or an Alexa or all these funny things. I'm pretty paranoid about data. Um, and then I never did ancestry.com or any of those either. So will you explain for our audience today the scope? Because I think it helps understand the landscape to understand what the 3x4 does.
Okay, I think that's a great question, but I'm actually going to take it back one
Sure.
step because I think I'd love to tell you about what are the different kinds of genetic tests. You've mentioned quite a few of them that are available in the marketplace, but I actually just wanted to take it back and it's like, what are these genetic tests? Like, what are they actually testing? Because I
Yeah.
think, and then we can talk about how they differ.
Perfect.
So let's just go back to genetics. You know, what is it and why is it so interesting to us? So think of genetics as your blueprint. It's your code. So you probably come across this idea of a DNA sequence code. And you've heard of chromosomes, you've heard of genes, but what actually is it? So I always describe it as thinking of it as a language. So we know that in English we have 26 letters in our language. And when we take these letters and we group them together, they can make words. Put a bunch of words together, they make a sentence. Put sentences together, we'll get a paragraph. And eventually we can tell a story. And genetics is exactly the same idea, but we only have 4 letters to work with, A, T, C, and G. But essentially, they do the same thing. We group these letters together. When we group them together, they make something called a codon. And a codon is actually a code for an amino acid. And I know that everyone out here knows that amino acids is the building blocks of proteins. So imagine now you've got your own code of these A's and T's and C's and G's, these letters in your DNA. They come together, they make amino acids, they make proteins. And remember that proteins are hormones, they're enzymes, they're brain messages, what we call neurotransmitters. Everything in your body is driven by proteins. So when we make our code from our DNA, is essentially making all the proteins and everything else in our body. Now, 99.9% of our code between us is identical, between you and I, Shivani, and everyone
Amazing.
else. But at 0.1%, our code is different from each other. So I like to call these spelling changes. So I might have a C where you have a G, and someone else might have, same like me, a C. So it's just about the letter that is there. that 0.1% of the time. Now, why are they so interesting, these spelling changes? Because they don't always, but they can change the amino acid, which can change the protein, which means it can change the way our enzymes work. It can change our hormones. It can change how we metabolize different vitamins in our body. And so if we can understand our 0.1%, if we can understand where our code is different from each other, if we can understand these spelling changes, and there's other words that are commonly used, polymorphisms, SNPs. Some people use the word mutation. I never do. I don't like it. It's a negative word. These spelling changes that define who I always say they define who we are and how we respond to the world around us. Why we respond differently to foods, to supplements, to the environment, to toxins, to stress, to trauma, to exercise that we mentioned earlier. So it's these changes in our DNA that actually is what we test. So when you do a genetic test, whether you swab the inside of your cheek or you spit into a tube or you give blood, we're looking at the DNA and we're reading your letters and we're looking to see your spelling changes, and those give us insight into who you are. Okay, so that's what the genetic tests do. Now, to jump to your question, what are the different kinds of tests? Because there are many. So I'll start at the kind of top. The top is what I call medical genetics. These are very rare spelling changes, but if you have them, your chances of getting a disease, quite a serious disease, are quite high.
Okay.
I don't work in that space at all, but there are companies that specialize in them because they're such rare changes in the DNA that very few people will be interested in them. And there is always something you can do, diet, lifestyle, all that, but the genes are a little bit more powerful. So we call that space medical genetics. Then we've got ancestry. You mentioned ancestry. So we look at your spelling changes in your DNA, and it gives us an idea of plotting where you come from, the contribution of the different populations. So it's great. So Ancestry, 23andMe have done an amazing job of being able, and we'll talk about privacy. I'm happy to talk about what are the things you should be looking for to keep your DNA private. But these companies, Ancestry and there's a few of them actually, but Ancestry and 23andMe essentially are able to do genetic testing and tell you where you come from and what was your journey. And it's great and it's very interesting and I really like it. But we know 23andMe are having some problems now, which, yeah, we can talk about another time. It's not really relevant to this conversation of where they went wrong. But we will talk about privacy and where kind of it'll come up on when they went wrong. So that's ancestry. Then we have pharmacogenomics. Pharmacogenomics is drug metabolism, pharmaceuticals. So when you take pharmaceutical, we metabolize that drug in a different way. And you'll know this. You know, some people can take Tylenol and they like land up sleeping for 2 days and they can't get out of bed. Some people take Tylenol and they're like, oh, that was no big deal, right? So we all respond differently to the drugs we take, and it's determined by these spelling changes in our genes. So if we can understand our genetics, our doctors can actually prescribe a medicine more specifically to us. Amazing. So I'm leaving the best for last, you can hear. So the best for last is what we call nutrigenomics, or sometimes I just call it lifestyle genetics. This is what we're talking about when the test Shivani did, where you can look at your spelling changes. It gives you insight into who you are, how you're responding to the world. And by knowing that information about yourself, you can now make the best possible choices, whether it's about bone health or vitamin D or vitamin B12, whether it's about the kind of exercise you do or how you manage your weight or understanding your hormones. Looking at your genes gives you insight, or the clinician you're working with, on how to really personalize and optimize everything you do. So I know that was a very big answer, but kind of took us a while to get there.
No, I love that answer because sometimes you need the framework to understand what we're going to talk about today. And so will you explain nutrigenomics versus epigenetics? Because we hear a lot about epigenetics and I wanted to understand the difference.
Okay. Excellent question. So I started off talking about genetics. So whether it's genetics, pharmacogenetics, nutrigenetics, it's spelling changes in our DNA. It's It's our sequence code that we're interested in, right? Did you have the C? Did you have the G? What does that tell me about you? Epigenetics, epi is the word above genetics. So when we talk about epigenetics, it's not about your sequence code. It's not about your blueprint. Epigenetics is about the way your genes behave. So what happens in our body is our genes are all wrapped up beautifully and tightly into chromosomes. When we are exposed to some stimulus, it could be a toxin, it could be sunshine, it could be a hug, it could be loneliness, anything that happens in our environment, it'll cause our chromosome to open up, our gene to open up, and it'll make a protein. It might be dopamine or serotonin, it might be vitamin D, it might some kind of protein is going to be made. So a gene gets switched on to make a protein and gets switched off to kind of tuck it away and put it away. We don't need it anymore. This is the world of epigenetics. So epigenetics is how do genes switch on and off? How do they behave? Whereas genetics is about the code. But of course, the two of them work together. So I talk about the yin and yang of genetics and epigenetics because genetics gives you insight into who you are. Understanding who you are enables you to make the best choices to optimize the way your genes switch on and switch off.
Amazing. So when it comes to a DNA test like this one, when I have gone to conferences like A4M, which is a very big longevity functional medicine conference, and they do fellowships and different things, I've seen multiple DNA tests out there. And so as someone who's very into testing, and I love getting big blood work done and the Dutch test and the stool test, I love that data so I can make an annual decision on the trajectory of what I'm going to focus on with my health. How do we as the consumer differentiate on what's better? Because the 3x4 is actually a very affordable DNA test. But when I was at A4M Vegas last year, I spoke at that conference on curcumin. I met companies where it was 1,000, 1,500. It was really expensive for those tests. So how can someone like me decide?
Yeah. So there are a lot of tests. I mean, hundreds of tests that you will be exposed to. So there's a couple of things we've done differently. And I'll tell you what we've done differently. And then I'll tell you what are the kind of questions as a consumer, whether you're a clinician like yourself or just a general consumer, should be asking when you're trying to make a decision about doing a genetic test. So there's a couple of things differently that I feel quite strongly about. The first is there are these spelling changes give us information about who we are. But by themselves, they are not that powerful. Remember, they're insightful, they're informative, they're interesting, but they're not powerful. So what I don't like is genetic testing companies who are giving a recommendation, a supplement, a diet, an exercise recommendation just on a single gene or a single gene variant, as we say, a spelling change. So what we do at 3x4 is we're more interested in, I've been in functional medicine for 24 years. We're interested in biochemistry, physiology, how the body works. So rather than say, what are the genetics of diabetes, we're actually interested in what's actually going on in the body that manifested as diabetes 10, 20, 30 years down the line. Is it detox? Is it inflammation? Is it glucose insulin? Is it hormones? Is it histamine? So what we do is we look at the pathway in your body, what we call the biochemical pathway in your body. We look at all the genes that impact that pathway. We score them together and we let you know whether together the genes are impacting that area. And if that's the case, we definitely want to look at what can we do and how can we address that. So that's one of the differences. The other thing that I feel strongly about is the way we give you the information. And you'll know this from this report, right? Every genetic test company looks the same as a blood test from LabCorp or Quest. And that's not helpful to anyone, right? So we wanted to build a report that was engaging and interesting and easy to understand. So I can give you data, lots of data, but data is never going to be useful to you. So we have built a beautiful report. It's got colors, it's got storytelling, it's got imagery, it's got infographics that change depending on your genetic result to try and make it something that you can really get stuck into and go, oh, this is me. I understand what I need to do and I understand. So that's kind of just two things that I'm mentioning. So I'm going to just mention the kind of questions you should be asking of a genetic testing company when you go to a conference like this and there's like 10 different companies, right? So the first one is who built the test? Unfortunately, many companies are what I call copy and paste companies. So they look at other companies, they just choose the same genes, and they spend their money on logos and color and marketing and social media. So are there scientists in your company that actually built the test? First question. Who's on the scientific advisory board? Who's keeping an eye on this company and making sure you're accountable? The third thing is, how do you actually choose the genes? Because you can find companies who will promise you 25,000 genetic results. We only have 174. And you might think that a company that gives 25,000 is better than a company that gives 174, but actually not, because it's easy to give you data. I could give you hundreds of thousands of pieces of data. We want to make sure that every piece of information we give you is going to be useful to you in making decisions for your life. So how does that company make a decision about which genes to include? How do they support you? Is there education? Are there videos you can watch? Are there clinicians you can go to who've been trained in this, that know how to interpret it and know how to help you build out a treatment plan or a diet or a lifestyle plan? So these are just, and of course, privacy. How do they manage data? How do they store data? How do they manage your personal information? These are all really important questions that you need to ask of any company.
Of course. Of course. So how do you manage data before I move on to my questions around health that I saw in that report today?
Okay, yeah, let's get the data thing out. Okay, so there's a couple of things you want to ask. The first is, does the company sell the data to third parties? Now, this has kind of been the undoing of 23andMe in many ways. Was what they do is they test as many people as they can. They take the data, they de-identify it. So they're not giving your name and your email address. They take your data, but they sell the data to another company. In this case, they sold it to Glaxo, which is a pharmaceutical company, to be used for drug discovery. Now, I have no judgment on that. It's its own kind of business model where you're getting data to sell it to do something else. And it's probably going to be quite an interesting way for doing drug discovery. We don't do that. We do not sell data. It's not our mission in life. So you want to know that about the company. It's not a deal breaker. It's important that you know what they're doing with your data.
For sure.
The second thing is, how do they store the data? So I'll tell you what we do. There's two pieces of information. There's your genetic information. Remember, it's just letters, A, T, C, G, like rows and 3 to 4 billion of letters, And then there's information about who you are. So that's my name, my last name, my email address, and my phone number. What we do is we have a server that stores the data, the letters, in the USA. And then we have a server in Ireland that stores my name and my last name and my email address. And that way, geographically, we're keeping those pieces of information very far away, because we don't want anyone to be able to put those pieces together.
Right.
The other thing is, we do not store your report. So, Shivani, your report, I don't have it. 3x4 doesn't have it. Only when you click on Get My Report do these two pieces of information come together. They download a report onto your computer and they separate and go away again. So there's nowhere in the 3x4 world that your report actually exists. It's not for us to have your report. You have your report. You decide if you want to share it with friends and family, on the podcast, but that's not for our decision. So these are the other, and the last thing I would say is, when you ask a company is, what do you do with the DNA? So there's some companies, when they do they extract DNA out of those cheek cells, they will, what they call biobank. They will keep the DNA that at another time later in your life, you can go back and have that DNA tested. We don't biobank. So when we do a genetic test, we destroy the swab, we destroy the DNA, we run nothing. But there are some companies who do it. So these are the kind of questions that you want to be asking and thinking about when you're dealing with a genetic company.
Got it. Thank you for that, because I'm always someone who worries a lot about that topic, and how much of my data is sitting everywhere in people's hands who don't deserve it. I have a choice of where my data goes on my body. If I
Definitely.
like to share it, which I do a lot on my podcast, that's my choice. So
Right.
my next question for you is, you're right. The report is beautiful. I opened it and I was like, each time I open it, I actually get new insights, new understandings, notice new things that I didn't really acknowledge before. And I've looked at it a number of times. So today I opened it back up because I was going to interview you, and it said in big, loud letters, the first thing it said was bone health, very high impact. Then it said oxidative stress. Then it said methylation. And I was like, okay, yes, I know I have to take methylated B vitamins. I got that one. But what I found so fascinating was, of course, the workout one, because I was like, pat on the back. I have good genes for something. Thank
Do.
you. And then on another page, it talked about you're likely to have chronic inflammation. You're likely to not absorb D. You're likely mid-range likely to have histamine issues. So when you get reports, when you built this report, how did you decide what were the priorities of those things that you were going to talk about? And then how do you best convey the information? I know it because I've read my report. How do you best convey to someone the priorities they need to take when it comes to their health? Because that report was pretty intense. And so how can someone operationalize it? And then later, my question is going to be, what are some stories you've seen of someone who's taken this data and made the changes necessary, and then of course had like a profound result from
That was a lot of questions in one question.
it?
So I don't know that I'll remember all of them, but let's start at the beginning. So I think what you're asking in the first question was, how did I decide what areas to focus on and cover? So we have in our report what we call 36 pathways. And each pathway is kind of a metabolic or biochemical process in the body. So I'll just give you some insight. We break it into 6 categories. And the reason I did it was, again, I've been in functional medicine for 24 years, and I'm always thinking starting at the cell, what is impacting how our cell functions. Then I think about, so it's called like a systems biology approach, right? Then I think about all the systems in my body and think about how are the genes impacting the systems in my body. Then I think, so that's how I did it, is I started with the top and I kind of worked down and thought, what are all the things that are impacting that if I'm a clinician, I need to know this information to understand my patient. So you mentioned a few of them. So we start off at the cell level, cellular health, inflammation, detox, oxidative stress, and the tricky one, methylation, which is a tricky one to understand. Then we go down to systems level. So systems are going to be things like glucose and insulin. How do genes impact that? Hormones, oh my gosh, so important, right? We all metabolize our hormones in a different way. How do the genes change the way we metabolize hormones? And we talk about mood, and when we give examples, that's a great one to give an example. Anxiety, depression, ADD, ADHD, addiction behavior. We talk about memory and brain health, cognitive function, like are my genes impacting how I will manage memory and memory loss, and what can I do, obviously, to prevent it and delay loss of memory. Histamine, fascinating molecule in our body that acts like a radar for switching on our immune system, but if it's not switched off, can actually cause a lot of crazy like symptoms happening. So that's our second category. Then we think in the cardiovascular space, vascular health and blood clotting and cholesterol metabolism. So important. Then we go to my favorite place, which is energy. So coming from being a dietitian, where I was so disillusioned with this concept of calories in and calories out, if we all eat low calories and we all exercise, we're going to lose weight. Not true. And we know that, right? We all know that. And no one had a better answer for me. So my PhD was actually in obesity, because I wanted to answer this question: why do some of us gain weight so easily and find it hard to lose weight? Because when I was studying to be a dietitian, there was this idea that I had, you lack willpower. You've got no self-control. That's why you can't lose weight. It's devastating, right? It's devastating. So genetics is fascinating. It gives us information about where in our weight journey, and I call it energy because I don't want to have a dieting conversation. So it's like, how do genes impact the way we consume energy, snacking or binge eating, how we experience hunger, or how full we feel? Amazing to imagine that none of us experience hunger in the same way.
Hmm.
And if we eat the same food, we don't experience fullness, what we call satiety, in the same way. How we store energy, how we burn up energy. So you can hear I'm very passionate about that area. Then we look at exercise and how we respond to training, injury susceptibility, you mentioned, how we recover. Some of us need 2-3 days of recovery. Others can take 1 day of recovery and they're fine, not me. And then lastly, we look at the vitamins, like vitamins and minerals. How do genes impact the way we metabolize, convert? So you spoke about vitamin D, vitamin B12, I think is in your report. How efficient is my body at managing these? So if you start at the cellular level and kind of work down, everything I've spoken about is relevant, irrespective of if you're trying to prevent disease and just be as healthy as you can be, if you're trying to manage a chronic condition, long COVID, autoimmune, Lyme, cardiometabolic, weight management, sport, everything you need is in one platform. All right, so that's the first question. Now I can't remember the second one. Already I can't remember the second one.
That's okay. I actually have a better question now.
Okay.
So, because you're so passionate about energy, which I'm very passionate about as well, I come from a family of all diabetics, and the end stage of diabetes is always heart attack, stroke, quadruple bypass, leg amputation, Parkinson's, dementia. And so, knowing that since I was little, I've always had this very strong opinion about health. I've always researched it, I've always been a guinea pig. But since I was in high school, I've lifted weight, done cardio. I've built a lot of discipline and rules into my life because that's the only way I know to prevent the diabetes that I have always perceived that's coming at me. And I've been able to win at it this whole time. And now at 44, perimenopause, all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, I think I have to have a new approach. I think I need a new formula with a new equation to win. And that's where data helps because sometimes we could be working against ourselves. I do have endurance and I do use exercise. And even the test says your mood is far better if you exercise. And that's factually true. I am 100% nicer human being if I have moved my body in the morning. And if I haven't, if you know me well, you'll just see the whole energy is off. But as I was looking at my report, it says on here, your fat cells may be prone to inflammation. And then it says your fat cells fuel optimally when you exercise. Your resting metabolism may be moderate. And it says you likely don't have an unregulated appetite. I kind of disagree. And then it says your potential to readily store fat is not elevated, but you will likely respond to weight management intervention. So when you see something like that in a report, what was your plan and what is the guidance that someone should take from that?
Well, just to, it's interesting what you said. So, well, you said a lot. So let me think what I want to pick out of that. So the interesting thing about the weight journey is it's never the same for anyone, right? So if anyone tells you that there's a perfect diet in the marketplace, just see it as a red flag. It's just not true, right? Because we're so different. So there's no keto or paleo or no carb or high carb that if everyone does it, that's great. It's just not true. Again, we're all different and we respond differently. But the interesting thing about energy, and this is why I didn't build a dieting genetic test, is because sometimes it's not about the energy. So interestingly, someone will present and say, I've been battling with my weight my whole life. I've tried so many diets and nothing I can do is working. And we do the genetic test and everything I just spoke about, how we store energy, how we burn up energy, appetite actually doesn't come up in the genetics, but they've really been battling. But actually, if we go what we call upstream, so we start at the top of the gene test, we see inflammation, we see detoxification, we see glucose insulin. I'm not talking about your test, but this often happens. If you don't resolve detox and inflammation, you will never resolve weight, right? It just won't come off. So what's so interesting is everyone comes and they go, oh, I can't lose. So either people come to me and say, I've been trying to lose weight my whole life. It's my genetics. I can't lose weight. And when we look at the genetics, either the genetics are playing a role and actually are making it difficult for that individual to lose weight, or it's actually not in there and maybe it's inflammation and detox, which we can resolve by using really good nutrition, really good supplements, really good lifestyle changes. So we always say like genetics is the why. So think of a question you have, like, why can't I lose weight? Why? Go back to the genes.
Mm.
Why am I fatigued all the time after training? And so your point, I mean, I've seen your genetic report and I mentioned this, like athletically, you have so much going for you, but you need to watch out for oxidative stress and methylation, all those things, right? So we can exercise fantastically, but it doesn't mean you have bone health. It's in purple. So we use color. So we always talk about purple. Purple is where the genes are having the greatest impact. Now, you might say to me, actually, I'm in my 40s. I've got no issue with my bones. Of course you don't. You're in your 40s, but it's showing up in your genes. So what's great about the test is saying, I should be paying attention to this. Like, am I doing the right kind of exercise? Because we know some exercise is really good for bone health, some not. Then we can say, what about my diet? And then thinking, even though they're telling me I should only have a bone scan in my 50s, maybe I should actually do it in my 40s. So I'll give you an example of an interesting story about bone health. So my sister lives in Australia. Of course, everyone in my family has done the genetic test, and she's late 50s, a couple of years older than me. And she calls me and says, "You're not going to believe this, but I went to a hormone doctor because you told me to, and you said I had to go to a hormone doctor. And they sent me for a whole lot of tests, and they did a bone scan, and I have the beginning of osteoporosis." And I'm like, what? She exercises, she eats well. I was like, this is really bizarre. Like, I didn't see that coming at all. So I go back to her genetic report and I look at her bone health, and it's perfect. It's low, 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 right? It's yellow. So I'm like, there's nothing in your genes that would make you susceptible to having osteoporosis in your 50s. So I said to, like, she lives very far away from me. I'm in Seattle. She's in Sydney, Australia. I was like, Janine, what are you doing? What are you doing that you're not telling me? Anyway, it turns out she's been taking medication for heartburn for a very, very long time that I did not know about. Okay. And she went to the most famous gastroenterologist in Australia who told her, there's nothing you can do about heartburn. Just take Nexium. And she's been taking it for like 10 years. And what does Nexium do? It completely changes that kind of acid-base balance of the absorption of nutrients into your bones. So her beginning of osteoporosis was directly related to this drug that she had been told to take for the rest of her life. And when she asked, can I do anything with diet or lifestyle? They said, no, there's nothing you can do. You have to take the... Anyway, it's always interesting when your sister lives on the other side of the world and you're like hearing this for the first time. Anyway, but what was interesting is by looking at her genes, I could actually see like, no, there's something not right about the story. If I looked at the genes and there were lots of purple and everything, I'd be like, okay, we need to explore this more. But actually it was coming from somewhere else. So this is just an example of how knowing our genes, now you're the opposite. I would say for you, your genes did show up for, and it doesn't mean now, it could be in 10 years time or 20 or 30, but knowing you're making brilliant decisions, you're doing the right training, you're eating well, you're taking the right supplements, and you can prevent it.
Yeah.
And that is the whole point of it. Yeah.
It's so beautiful what you just said. You can take a DNA test. It can give you a lot of data. You have then this opportunity to understand kind of your pitfalls or your areas of focus that would support you to not have those issues as you age. But also, if they're showing up as not a problem, but they're a problem, it's so important to take a moment and say, what am I doing wrong? Like your test says she's not likely to have high cholesterol. And I'm like, yeah, your test is wrong. My cholesterol is coming high this last year. I have to.
Perimenopause. Perimenopause.
I know, it's ridiculous. And if you look at your blood work as a report card, I think as we age, we're just going to keep failing and getting frustrated by it. So we have to look through that lens of perimenopause, menopause will create certain shifts. And then we have this opportunity with hormone replacement therapy or different lifestyle decisions to shift them. But you're right, when it comes to health and weight gain and all these issues that can happen for us, if we're not looking at the cellular health, how are we addressing inflammation? How are we addressing oxidative stress? How are we addressing detoxification? We're not able to support upstream. And then forever downstream, we're exercising, we're dieting, we're trying our hardest, but it's almost like you're on a hamster wheel without addressing the bigger issue. So when it comes to tests like these, I did have a previous episode with Meryl Brandwine, who's local to where I am, and we dove a little bit into my test. And she mentioned oxidative stress. And I said, oh, I've got that covered. I take turmeric because I own a turmeric company. That's everything I do. She goes, actually, this is what's interesting. If you look deeper, if you actually understand how to read these genes, it's glutathione that's an issue for you. And I was like, what?
I saw that in your results. Yeah.
So does that mean that my body doesn't make glutathione efficiently? And we know that that's a master antioxidant. And so I
No,
should take it as a supplement? Or what does that mean for
no,
someone?
it's not saying that. So what she's referring to is, so oxidative stress, which is I always think of as like human rusting, right? Which we want to keep to a minimum.
Yeah.
Inflammation and detoxification all work together. They all work together. And we need to think about all three of them and methylation, but let's focus on those three. So what in your genes, I just had a quick look again, there is a gene called GST, glutathione transferase. And this gene, which is codes for an enzyme, is one of the most important enzymes in the body for clearing toxins from the body.
Okay.
So when toxins come into our environment, they come in from our world outside, pollution, toxins in our food, it can be like plastic water bottles, anything like that, right? Toxins coming in. But our body also generates toxins as a natural process. So oxidative stress, which can be caused by external environmental things, it can be caused by a lot of exercise, and it can be caused by our internal metabolism, and it does, totally normal, generates these molecules in our body, we call them superoxides, hydrogen peroxide, that need to be cleared from our body, because if they don't get cleared from our body, they're completely normal and natural, but if they don't get cleared efficiently, they'll build up in the body and they'll do damage to our body. So this gene, one of them that we're talking about now, is GST, is one of the very important enzymes responsible for taking these toxins or oxidative stress molecules and removing them from the body. Now, the spelling change that you have means that you have no function of this enzyme. The enzyme is actually zero. It's just not working at all.
Right.
So it's quite a powerful one. Yeah. So it means that it impacts your body's ability to clear inflammatory molecules, oxidative stress molecules, and toxins. So now we're like, okay, what are we going to do? Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, turmeric, curcumin, amazing, because it is a brilliant molecule for oxidative stress. But we actually need to think back to our conversation about epigenetics. Epigenetics is when we can switch on a gene using diet, lifestyle supplements to help the body do something that it needs to do.
Okay.
And that's what we're going to do in this case, right? Because the GST gene is actually part of a family of genes. There's GST1 and P1 and T1, and you have what we call a deletion in only one of them.
Okay.
So what if we could switch on all the others to work extra hard to compensate for the one that you have that isn't working so optimally? Mm. So what we want to do is not supplement with glutathione, because actually the spelling change means that the gene isn't there. Right. We want to switch on your body's ability to detox and clear toxins from the body. And what is the most powerful molecule to do that is sulforaphane. So sulforaphane comes from what we call the cruciferous vegetables: broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, all the family. And they contain a compound called glucoraphanin, all these big words. And when we chew that broccoli, we release an enzyme called myrosinase that acts on glucoraphanin and creates the most beautiful molecule called sulforaphane. And this molecule, which is in our food, by chewing, can switch on genes in our body and switch on all the family of GSTs that can help you clear all these toxins, bring down inflammation, decrease oxidative stress. So what we actually want to do in response to you having this gene variant is actually, you want to carry on obviously with your turmeric, curcumin, but you really want to get these vegetables into your diet. Now, the only trick is they need to be eaten raw.
Got it. I eat them uncooked.
Yeah. So when you cook broccoli, cauliflower, or cabbage, it kills off this enzyme called myrosinase, which
Got
means
it.
you can't make sulforaphane.
Wow.
So it only works if you are actually eating these vegetables raw, which no one knows, right? We're like, and it's not that eating broccoli cooked is a bad thing. It's never a
Right.
bad thing because it's got other good stuff about it. But to make what I call this magic molecule, my favorite molecule of the century, we do need to eat them raw. There are some supplements in the industry where you get like a dehydrated broccoli sprout. You can also get broccoli sprouts. You can make them yourself, sprout yourself, or you can buy them and just sprinkle them on a salad. And they are like super powerful. So that's the story around the gene spelling change that you have.
I love that answer because I was going about it the wrong way. I read it as you suck at detoxing. It's probably why I've been obsessed with detoxing since my 20s. I go to every Ayurvedic center. I go there for 3 weeks. They detox me completely. I feel incredible. I'm at like my highest vibration self. And then I live my normal life and I come crashing
Mm.
down over time. And my body will start screaming at me saying, you need to detox. Princess, you can't keep running 200 miles an hour, building your company and not pause. And I'll just tell that voice, go away, go away. I have no time. Who has time to
Exactly,
detox?
because we're busy. Because we're
Yeah.
busy.
And
Yeah,
then I bought an infrared sauna because I was like, well, build in
great.
detox time.
Great.
You better detox. But it's so interesting because the level of detail you just went to was, hey, it's this batch of genes and this is how you actually support them. So you got to the exact precise answer to create the change, which is why I wanted to have you on my podcast, because all of us who are obsessed with our health and have gone to functional medicine and said, hey, I need help, I need support, I don't understand. I was getting kind of frustrated because I was like, we have to become functional medicine doctors of our own for our own health. And who has time to go learn all this biology and chemistry in detail? It takes a lot. And so, what I love about what you just said is when I sit down with one of your practitioners and go into great detail about this test to really understand those batches and those deletions, we can put a pretty, it might not be simple, but a pretty robust plan in place of, hey, you need to do these couple of things. And that's how you'll get those results that you've been seeking for the past couple of years.
Yeah, to support it when you're not detoxing. You need a detox every second of every minute of every day of every year. And that's the problem with detox is you can't just be, I mean, I love all the other stuff you're doing. It's fantastic, brilliant. But detox is a process that happens all the time. And we need to optimize it all the time because it's one of the most, it's not like the old fashioned, oh, we're going to go do a juice fast, we're going to detox, we're going to be fine. No, we need to address it, especially when the genes are telling us that you don't have the GST. We need to address it, oxidative stress, methylation. None of these things that I've mentioned work in isolation. So when you talk about hormones and you talk about detox, that's why we work with amazing clinicians who are thinking about all, because that GST gene we just spoke about is so important for estrogen metabolism. It's
Oh,
not only
God.
about detox.
No
So,
wonder I'm estrogen dominant.
because
That makes so much sense.
yeah, it's impacting how your estrogen's being metabolized, which probably explains a couple of things. So you want a clinician who can look at all of this together and come up with a plan, not just we're going to look at that, but we're going to ignore that. Anyway, I know we don't have much time longer, so we could talk for hours and hours, but
We
we don't have
could.
too much time, so we'll stop there. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today. Is there any final message you have for our audience today that we didn't get to cover? And then share where they can find you. Because I just want to say I'm grateful for your test and for you. It's it's rare that I find something that truly moves the needle with my health. And those are the only people who are allowed onto this podcast because I'm here to share what actually works. And it's my
Yeah.
job to go run through all the conferences and longevity conferences to find the best of the best. And so I'm grateful that the universe brought me to you.
Yeah, well, I was very grateful you came up and chatted to me. So that was lovely. And can you believe it's almost a year since we met?
Wow.
It's absolutely crazy. So, well, I've already shared how I love broccoli and sulforaphane. So, I've ticked that box. I think just one thing I didn't mention is I just want everyone to understand one of the most amazing things about genetics is you only do it once in your life. You do a genetic test once in your life because remember, it's your code and your code doesn't change. So, you're going to spend $299. You're going to spend a couple of $100 more working with a clinician who can really dive deeply and help you come up with it. But that's it. That's it. You never have to take this test. And you know that all the other tests you take, you have to repeat them every 6 months, not genetics, right? Genetics is a once in a lifetime investment that gives you the why. So if your question now is perimenopause, come back in 5 years' time, you want to run a marathon, how can I best do that? Come back, I'm feeling tired, let's go back to your genetic test. So it's a source of information that lasts for the rest of your life. And that's why, for me, it's a no-brainer.
Awesome. Thank you. And what is your website? Where can everyone find you?
It's www.3x4genetics.com, like ex-boyfriend. So 3x4genetics.com. And of course, all the social media platforms, we're all there, but that's the best way to find us.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today. I really appreciate it. This is a topic I had not covered in such depth before, and I'm always looking for those incredible tools so my audience has what they need to optimize their health. So thank you, listeners, for joining on the Fusionary Health Podcast. For more information on me, you can visit drshivani.com, where you'll find this podcast and more information on it. And please share this episode with a loved one or someone who could use this information to optimize their health today. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining me for this episode. Check out our sponsor, Fusionary Formulas, the potent turmeric supplement used by doctors around the U.S. for patients with pain and inflammation. www.fusionaryformulas.com. I'm your host, Dr. Shivani Gupta. For more, visit shivanigupta.com. Subscribe to this podcast in Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Click the follow button or subscribe in any of the apps that you use. That's all I've got for you on the Fusionary Health Podcast this week. You have the power to transform your health and achieve vibrant health starting today.